Welcome to TVUG for August 2021. Tonight's session is Rock Your Code, Code and App Performance for Microsoft.NET, presented by David McCarter. We're always looking for speakers for TVUG. If you'd like to do a presentation, please reach out to us at meetup.com/TechValleyNetUserGroup. TVUG is sponsored in part by the .NETFoundation.org. Looking for other user groups to attend? Please visit meetup.com/.NET-virtual-user-group.
So anyway, welcome to Rock Your Code, Code and App Performance for Microsoft.NET. Again, I'm David McCarter. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm a C# Core MVP. I'm a patent inventor, writer, trainer, solution architect. I've won so many awards I can't even keep count anymore, but you can go to my blog and read all about me if you really want to. And like I said, I'm glad you're here. I hope the weather's good where you are. I don't know. It's always nice to here by the beach in San Diego, but I know a lot of the rest of the country has some pretty crappy weather right now. And there's my information. There's my email address. If you want to email me after the user group meeting, I'll be happy to reply to you as soon as I can. There's also my Twitter handle. I hope you follow me on Twitter because I'm always tweeting stuff every single day. There's my LinkedIn if you need to contact me that way, especially if your team needs help. And am I on camera? There you can see me with my green screen. You can't see me. The web version of LinkedIn doesn't do green screens. That kind of sucks. Recording has started. Have you made me a presenter yet?
It's not giving me that as an option. Do you still have? Maybe it remembers you.
Yeah, I think it does. Let me. Yep. There we go. So you can see my screen?
But not your camera.
But not my camera. Okay, so you've got to pick. You want my face or the screen or the PowerPoint presentation? I think you want my PowerPoint presentation. So I apologize. I have no idea what's going on. This is one of the first times I've ever presented through LinkedIn, and it's not the easiest thing to do. I'm used to using StreamYard, which works heck of a lot better than this, and Teams does. But anyway, but you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. And people, don't forget to mute your phone when you're here, just in case. I'm hearing some background noise. There you go.
Yep, I just muted everyone.
Okay, great. So anyway, there's my email, there's my LinkedIn, there's my Twitter. I hope you follow me on Twitter. And then I'm always, I tweet every single day. So I do this at the beginning of my weekly show. Those of you who don't know, I have a new weekly show on that. It's on Saturday mornings. It's called Rockin' the Code World with .NET Dave. And I get 5,000 to 13,000 viewers per episode. So I hope you check it out. It's every Saturday. But as part of my weekly show, I'm trying to raise money for the COVID relief in India. You know, their COVID, response is going really, really bad right now, including the producer of my show. They only get like 100 vaccines a day where he lives. And so India is having a really bad time right now. And I know we are going into our fourth wave, but India has been in a fourth wave for a while now, and they're really dire need of your help. So a number of months ago on my show, I did a $100 challenge. And I challenge all the software developers out there, not in India, to donate at least $100 or more to this link. And we're getting the money to families in India. And so on top of that, I hope you'll donate during the course of this meeting or later. And if you do, as long as supplies last, I will send you not only some swag, including a .NET Dave guitar pick, but also one of my books. I really want to raise money for the people there because I've lost people in India now. because of the COVID-19, and I don't want to lose any more. So I can go back and speak next year. So please go to that link and donate, and I'll really appreciate it. And I'll send you some cool stuff, including a copy of one of my books. Okay. This session is based off of my Rock Your Code and App Performance for Microsoft.NET that is available right now on Amazon. I hope you go pick up a copy. You know, this session, since it's only about an hour, really is limited in what the book actually has. So I hope you check it out. It's got everything from string performance we're going to be talking about today, reference types we're going to be talking about today, collections we're going to be talking about today, and collections under load, serialization, internationalization, we'll talk a tiny bit today. Analyzing code for issues, we will talk today, and a lot more. So, and it's based off of over 3,400 benchmark tests. That actually takes me about 2 days to run on my laptop. So I hope you go check out the book. I've been working on this book for a long time, and it's got a lot of great information in it. The current book right now is geared towards .NET Core 3 and .NET 4.8. So everything I'm going to be showing you today is all .NET 5 and .NET 6. Like I said earlier, you're going to be the first ones to see this information. Also, I'm raising money and did get a vocational training program started at the Voice of Slum in India, which I visited in 2019. So the reason I'm saying that is not only I'd like you to go donate to the Voice of Slum, but also 100% of the proceeds of my book goes to the Voice of Slum every month. And this is what has been able to get them to restart the vocational training for women there. So I hope you'll pick up a copy, just because all the profit goes to India. No profit goes to me. So I hope you check out the book after the episode. Also, I've started putting some of the content, I'm still working on it, on my website. So if you register and become a member of my website, you can read all of this information even before it's out in the book by going to that URL right there. So I hope you check that out if you don't want to wait for the book or if you want to read the latest information. I think there's one more thing. Yep. And I'd also like to plug, which kind of goes along, not kind of, does go along with this talk, and that is my coding standards for Microsoft.NET. It's in its 7th edition right now. The current edition is all .NET 5. The old edition is all .NET Core and .NET Framework. So I hope you check that out too. No more marketing, promise. So today, here's what we're going to do. Opening act is basically why I do my talks. General tips that you can start tomorrow and see some improvement in performance. Then we'll talk about strings, which is one of the most common types used in programming. And then we'll talk a little bit about reference types and structs, and a lot on collections, because that's really where you're going to see a lot of performance increase, is how you deal with collections. And I'm going to show you how to find these issues in your code yourself without hiring somebody like me. And then it's encore time and happy hour, which I think it's past happy hour where you guys live, right? Oh, I was just thinking like an hour ago, I don't think I've been to New York State itself since I was a little tiny kid. I actually grew up back, I was born in Delaware. And I remember going through New York once when I was a little kid going to Canada. And I think that's the only time I can remember even going through New York. I've been in New York City a couple times, but not where you guys live. Anyway, so code performance. Let's talk about code performance, why I'm doing this talk. Code performance is really, really important for especially the cloud nowadays, backend servers and services and UX, of course. But it's super, super important for the cloud, because basically, if you have poor performing code in the cloud, you're going to be charged more. That's all there is to it, because that's how you get charged for things in the cloud, is basically usage. And you have, if you can just get a tiny bit of increase in performance, and Facebook pays people's hundreds of thousands of dollars right out of college to do this, because if somebody in Facebook can save just a tiny bit of performance, that can actually add up to millions of dollars of savings a year for Facebook. That's why those developers get such a crazy starting pay. And that's it. And so now that everything is moving to the cloud, or at least hybrid these days, you really, really need to worry about performance. Performance should be at the top of your head pretty much in all of your coding endeavors these days. And I'm going to give you some real world examples here in a minute. And both are very important for now, but I really, really want to stress the future. Because I go into a lot of companies and they don't really care about the future, but that's the future you need to care about, because next year things are going to be worse as far as performance goes, and you need to start tackling it like this year. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. So please, please make sure you worry about the future, because apps last a long time, sometimes decades, and we need to always keep performance in mind when we're coding. And one of the sayings I made up when I first started doing this talk was, memory affects performance and performance affects memory. These two things go along hand in hand, and you have to worry about both these things if you're going to squeeze out the best performance for your apps, like I said, especially if they're in the cloud. Let me know if you have any troubles with my slides, because I haven't presented these in a while. So here's the real world example stats, and basically why I started doing this talk and why I wrote a book was a number of years ago. I worked at a company here in San Diego, and their biggest traffic days was Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And you all in America knows what that means. I don't have to explain it. The rest of all other days of the year, their traffic was pretty flat. But these were the two biggest days they had to worry about, and basically why they hired me that year, because every year before I came on board for a contract, they had issues on Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And this kind of gets into, you need to worry about the future, because even when I was at that company, I tried to get some data out of them, like, what was your traffic last year? That's one of the first questions I asked when I got to the company, and no one had the answer. Not a single person knew what their traffic was the year before, or even the year before that. So you need to, not only measure this stuff, but you need to keep it and make it available so people like me can come in and go, okay, well, this is your traffic now. This is what it was last year. Now let's shoot for this many transactions per second. And that should be our goal, but they didn't have that information, unfortunately. But I was able to do enough to get them through the holiday, to get them through Black Friday and Cyber Monday that year, with not one of their customers realizing anything happened, and that's the goal. So on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, they were averaging 20,000 transactions per second, with spikes up to 50,000 per second. Also, one of the things that kind of made this performance really important at this company was, they guaranteed their customers, and their customers were Nike, Toys R Us, big retailers like that. They guaranteed their retailers an 80 millisecond turnaround. That's in the SLA. So that's what we had to make sure we provided through the back end. And their largest customer when I was there was Nike. And Nike had 200 gigabytes of catalog information in memory. It literally took 2 hours for that server to reboot because of the hokey way they were doing in-memory caching. They weren't using anything like Redis or anything like that. They rolled their own, and it was really, really bad. But anyway, they had up to 200 gigabytes of catalog data and information in memory just for one customer. So there are a lot of pieces that I had to worry about when I worked there to make sure they could get through the Cyber Monday and Black Friday that year that I was there. So anyway, that's kind of where I started, and ever since then, I've been doing a lot of performance work for lots of other companies. Before you ask, all the benchmarks I'm going to show you, the 3,400 benchmarks, were all run on my laptop, and there's the stats because I know someone's going to ask it. Your stats will vary, but that's my machine right now. And here's your first tip. Here's how to get the biggest performance gain, like right now or tomorrow morning when you go back to work. I guarantee this will work. Move to .NET 5. And I don't say that lightly. And if you follow me on Twitter, I'm a pretty hard person to make happy. And I am so impressed with the performance increases in .NET 5. And for me to be impressed, they have to be 2, 3, 4-fold faster. And my story, if you are still in .NET Core, .NET Framework, start moving now, right? All the projects I've moved to .NET 5, I had almost absolutely no issues. All I did was make a new project, move the class files over, and boom, everything worked. I might have had to change a NuGet package or something like that, but I did not have any major issues moving any code to .NET 5. And I've migrated a lot of code to .NET 5 in the last year plus. So I can't stress this enough. You will get performance increases by doing nothing but just moving to .NET 5. So if that's not on your roadmap, it should be on your roadmap, especially since they're going to be dropping support for the other ones anyway. So anyway, so that's my big tip for that section. So next I'm going to talk about, and please ask questions. I'll try to look for them in the chat. I can address them. And at the end of my session, if you want me to hang out and answer questions, since I'm a Microsoft MVP or I'm .NET Dave, I'm more than happy to hang out because, when I start, it's not even, when I end, it's not going to be my dinner time yet. So. Okay, so here's some really quick things you can do right now with very little impact on your code that will make an impact on performance. The first is, and a lot of people don't do this, and I'm not really sure why, but clean your projects, remove unused usings. This is a two-step process I'm going to show you to make a performance increase. So the first step of the process is clean your projects, remove all the unused usings at the top of your class files. Why do that? It does slow down the code a tiny, tiny little bit, but it's really important for the next step. So if you install the Power Productivity Tools for Visual Studio 2017-2019, there's a feature in it where you can just right mouse click on the project and go to Power Pick commands and say remove and sort usings. Okay, this will go through the entire project and sort your usings, which is always a nice thing to do, but more importantly, removes the unused usings. I see so much code, including the code base I'm working on right now, that just has, 5, 10 unused usings at the top of their classes. So do that right now, and but most importantly, you need it for the second step of this. So the second step of this is clean unused references out of your projects. And references meaning references, project references, NuGet packages. You need to get rid of this stuff that's not being used. And I guarantee you, depending how many people work on your solution, you will have these because people load things, they try something, and then they go, okay, that's not going to work. But very few people go back and say, oh, I've got to remove the NuGet package, or I've got to remove that reference, or I've got to remove that project reference. I never see anybody do that. And then we're left with a big clutter of mess. And that's not good because it'll increase your deployment size and download time and things like that. So the first step of the process is important because you have to get rid of all the usings. The second part of the process is go to your project. Before like a month or two ago, you couldn't do this in Visual Studio unless you use CodeRust by DevExpress, and that's what I use. But go to CodeRush, or now it's available in 2019, and right mouse click on a project and say removed unused references. Okay, that will cause a build, and then it will go through and look at all the references you have and match them against your code. And then it will present you with a little screen that allows you to remove the references that found that you're not using anymore. So please do those 2 steps, please, before you check in your next source code, because it will make a performance increase, and it will just clean up your projects a lot better too. So, and also, if you want to turn on your cameras, I'd appreciate it. I only see 2 people, so it's hard for me to talk to 2 people. So all of my code examples and all my sessions and all my books really are real. I don't make this stuff up. I can't make it up anymore. I've been doing this too long. So, but I have changed names and variable names so I don't get sued by one of my former companies or something. But everything I'm going to show you is real, and I see people doing right now in code. So initialization of variables. I don't know why I can't say that word today. This is something I still see after 20 years of .NET. Do not set variable types to their default state like this. I see this all the time. Int counter equals 0 or person equals null. Don't do that, because that's the default state of those types, right? If you're a value type, the default, all the values have a default value, right? And if you're a reference type, the default is null. So there's no reason to do it in code, because now you're causing more instructions to be made, and therefore slowing down your code. So stop doing it. I'm going to keep saying this. I'm going to leave this in here until I see people stop doing this. That I still see it in code like today. So what should you do? And most of you, if you've been around .NET for a while, know the answer to this. And that is only set code default state if it's different from the default, right? So, do int counter or int counter equals 1. Okay, that's okay. Or person or person equals new, right? Those are okay, but don't do it the old way, because this is a performance problem and adds up, depending how many transactions you're doing per second through the back end, of course. So please do that. I'm going to keep these slides until people stop doing this stuff. Here's some other really quick tips you can do. And like I said, all these things I'm telling you in the first section, you can do with very little impact to your code. These are really easy things. Remove empty methods and commented out code. That's why we have source control now. So don't leave dead code in your projects. That will cause problems, including readability problems. Remove unused code blocks, variables, types. All of these things need to be removed before you commit to source. Do not ignore method results, right? I see a lot of people ignoring method results in code still these days. Don't do that. There's a result for a reason. If you're just checking the result is not null, there's a reason you're getting a result. So make sure you check it and throw the appropriate exception as needed. And that's covered in my coding standards book. So any questions right now? Before I go into the news section, this is really, Dave gets to take a drink out of his iced tea while you guys ask questions. No questions? Okay. So we're going to go on to the news next section, and we're going to be talking about strings. And unfortunately, I don't have enough time to talk everything I would like to talk about strings, especially when it comes to globalization and localization. So these are just some common things I see people doing a lot. And like I said, everything I'm showing you, I see people doing in code even today. Checking for empty string. Again, .NET's been around for 20 years. I don't know why we still do this. But many developers, including in legacy code, check for an empty string like this. Okay? By if email address equals ... Stop it, please, so I can cut this slide out of my deck. That has never been a good way to do it. So stop it. And it is a pretty good performance decrease when you do this. The only way you should be checking for empty string is like this. Is null or empty, or is null or white space? It's really the only way you should be checking if there's something in a string, okay? Don't use the other method. Don't even use equals string.empty. That's not good either. Only use these two things. Because not only is it checking to see if there's stuff in the string, but it's also checking it's not null. Because one of the most common things I see in code is something coming back that's a string, and someone start using that string without checking for null. That's one of the most common issues I see in coding these days. So please, please, please always use is null or empty, or is null or white space. And I'm going to prove it to you that it is faster. As you can see here, is null or empty wins. Is null or white space is a little bit slower because there's more work that the code has to do underneath the covers. And just for comparison, I did a null and empty string for comparison, for a check, and I did just null and empty quotes. And you can see those two things are a lot less performant than is null or empty or is null or white space. So again, this is something simple you could do really quick in your code. And if you use any refactoring tools like CodeRush from DevExpress, it'll warn you about these issues. And so will Analyze in Visual Studio. So please stop using quote or string.empty. Another thing I see, and a lot of these examples are actually from that code base that I worked on to help them get through Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And I saw this everywhere in their code. And not only everywhere, but everywhere they were doing a string comparison, they were doing it like this, every single place. Many string comparisons look like this, and this is from their code. You have an uppercase, you have two strings, you're trying to compare them, and every place in their code where they're comparing strings, they were using two lower. Okay, don't do that. Okay, because the first thing that's wrong with this is two lower doesn't check properly for different languages. Okay, and that's super, super important. Maybe not now in your code, but it will be in the future. I guarantee it. Because all code bases have to support multiple languages, spoken languages, not code languages, of course. So don't ever use two lower. Okay. And what you really should use, and I'm going to explain this when we get to the chart. You should really be using two upper with culture info. Okay, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more when we get to the chart. Well, the explanation is it's really super, super important for globalization. If you've ever been through a globalization project or localization project, as I have been since the 90s, every one of these projects are painful, okay? But they don't need to be painful with .NET if you just do it right in the first place. So the proper way, if you're going to compare strings, really, depending on what the string value is, of course, there's different choices, and that'll be in the chart. But the proper way you should be doing it is doing two upper, because two upper does work with multiple languages properly, and choosing one of the culture info enum, and in this case, I'm doing invariant because I was just probably checking an email or something like that. And in this, yeah. So make sure you always use two upper with culture info, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the graph here. So as you can see here, a two lower and two upper is fastest, right? With two upper, two upper actually being a little tiny bit slower than two lower, but it works properly with multiple languages, okay? But you really shouldn't use either of those, right? You should always be using either two upper invariant or two lower invariant, or two upper or two lower with culture info, okay? Because you need to use the culture info to tell the CLR that this is the this is the way we want to change. We want to verify because of different languages, people doing upper cases or different characters and things like that. But what I want to explain on this chart, because you might be saying, well, I should use 2upper, right? Well, no, you should use it with culture info, even though it's less performant, okay? And this is one of those places in code where you really have to make a decision on, are we going to do it the most performant way, or are we going to do it the most future-proof way, okay? And 2upper with culture info, yeah, I know about .NET 6. Oh, speaking of .NET 6, don't pay attention. I mean, I put the values in here for .NET 6, but .NET 6 is not released yet. So these will change before the release, and you'll be able to see those in the next version of my book and or my website. So, but I want to stress, you have to use it with culture info, okay? Because you need to tell it what type of checking you want done. Even though it's slower, you need to use that. And like I said, that's what I call future-proofing your code, because almost every project I've been on someday has to support different languages, and that's super costly and super time-consuming if you don't do it when you first code the code. So, and there's going to be, I think, 1 or 2 more places where I'm going to do the same kind of suggestion, where you really have to kind of pick which way to go depending on what your needs really are.
Hey, David.
So, yeah.
There was a question posted in the chat. What about using equals with string comparison with culture?
The different, we're going to talk, did I cut the string comparisons out of this? Yes, that's in my book. In string comparisons, I usually use what is it? The invariant culture.
Invariant culture, ignore case?
Yeah. So yeah, in string comparisons, you can also use that. I just showed you one string comparison method. There's a bunch, and that's all covered in my book. But yeah, actually, the better way of doing it is using the other string comparison methods, actually. Yeah. So any more? Let's see. What about using Google? Okay, got that. But does compiler smart enough to do all this optimization? No. Not really. So no, the compiler's not that smart. It's getting better, and you're going to see some of that in the upcoming slides between .NET 5 and .NET 6. I didn't include the information about .NET Core and .NET Framework because it's just a pain in the butt to do benchmarking with 2 different, completely different frameworks. And but you can look at my book or look at my website to find those out for .NET Core and .NET Framework. Okay, so I think that answered everything. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Now we're going to get to collections, which we'll spend most of our time in. I think this is this is reference types. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I just got a couple things to talk about reference types. Well, mostly just structures, because I found something when I was looking at structures and classes that was a pretty big performance hit, and that's why I kind of want to bring this up. I personally don't write a lot of structures just because I like classes better. But if you do use structures, make sure you override the equals statement and provide your own equals code in there. And again, I'll show you the info in a second. So if you have a structure, this is how you do it. You just override. There's 2 equals you need to override. One that takes that object as a parameter, one that takes the actual type as a parameter. And so this is not default in structures, but you should add it for all your structures. And I've got another thing for structures at the end of this section too. Now the performance difference was a lot bigger in .NET Core and .NET Framework, because as you can see, it's getting super, super close now in .NET 5 and .NET 6. Hopefully .NET 6 is going to be, I mean, look how much faster .NET 6 is, and it's not even released yet. So I always recommend overriding the equals in structures, and so does Visual Studio Analyze and Editor Config. So even though that it's slightly slower with override, I would stick with it because that's just the coding standards at this point. If it really gets a big difference, then I'll post something about it. But it's really kind of too close to call at this point. We'll see how it pans out when .NET 6 is finally released. But it's just a good practice if you're using structures to always override the equals. So my recommendation for structures is what I just said. You should implement this for all structure types, but structure types only. Don't use this pattern for reference types, because actually overriding equals for reference types is a lot slower. I don't know why. I need to talk to Stephen about that. But don't do it for classes. Only do it for structures, okay? Also, structures do not even implement operators. So if you're doing proper structure design, you should make sure you implement all the operators for structures too, okay? So I think that's pretty much it for reference types. Nope, got a couple other tips. Oh yeah. First, I've been preaching this for many years, and I don't see people doing it. So it's going to stay in my slide deck. Seal classes, okay? If you don't know what seal means, go look at it. It just basically means that sealing a class means it can't be inherited, okay? And that causes less work for the CLR to spin up your class, okay? You won't see big improvements for this. That's why I'm not even showing you any metrics for it, but it does add up, okay? And it does slightly speed up your classes. Even if you're using WinForms, it will slightly speed up WinForms and things like that. So make sure you seal every class that you didn't design to be inherited, okay? Classes should only be inherited for a purpose. Otherwise, seal them, and you'll get some performance increase from that. So that's super easy to do in your code. You just do search and replace and do that. And this is another pet peeve of mine, maybe because I have the only coding standards book out there. Please use proper class access modifiers, okay? Don't leave it as default, like use internal, private, protected, okay? Methods, properties, and classes should only be public on purpose, okay? Otherwise, they should be internal. I wish Microsoft would make internal by default, but they haven't. I've begged them for years and I've given up. But any class you create should be created internal first, and then only make it public or protected or something like that on purpose, okay? All these things will slightly speed up your classes, okay? And it's just better object-oriented programming, if you ask me. And I think that's it. Nope, I got some more tips. Oh, this is one of my #1 pet peeves, and I was talking to my boss today about this. I have yet to look at a code base that properly calls dispose on all of its objects. I've never worked on a code base that did it properly. And I'll tell you a story about this. I was working at this contract here in San Diego quite a while ago. And after I got a hold of their source code, that next Monday or whatever, I went into the manager for a meeting to decide, what I'm going to be working on next. And the first question I asked the manager was, do you have servers on your back end that you just have to reboot every once in a while and you don't know why? He goes, yes. And I go, I know exactly why. It's because of this. This is the #1 issue I see in code bases, is not implementing dispose properly, but worse, not disposing objects properly, okay? No code base I've worked on does this properly. And why this is a big deal, because I've seen this firsthand. If you don't dispose your objects properly, that will cause a virtual memory leak in .NET. And if this is running on a backend server, it will just keep eating up memory until there's no memory left, and then your entire server stops. Okay, So you don't want to be that developer that causes these issues in your code, okay? So please make sure if you're creating a type that is disposable, properly implement iDisposable. And if you're using a disposable type, make sure you use the using keyword on it, so that way it's disposed as soon as it's done being used. Okay. To make this a little bit easier for the types that you've created, I've created two extension methods in my open source projects. One is called Dispose Collection, which will basically just iterate a collection and see if there's any disposable objects in that collection, and then call dispose. Because like this code base of the Black Friday code base, they put a bunch of disposable objects in collections and never disposed any of them. So that was causing issues. So I made this extension method called Dispose Collection. But if you're creating a type, any reference type, of course, I always put in dispose fields in the dispose method, because what dispose fields will do is it looks at your type, it looks at all these fields in your type, it determines if any of those are iDisposable, and if they are, it calls it automatically, right? And the reason I use dispose fields everywhere is because this future-proofs my code of some other developer coming in, putting a disposable field in the type and not disposing of it. This dispose fields covers that 100%. So that's, again, that's what I go back and call future-proofing. Okay. So I talk more about this in my coding standards talk, but please do this. Every code base I see does it incorrectly. Unless it's mine, of course. Any questions? Nope. No questions yet? Okay, now we're on to the big section, and that's collections. This is where you're going to see some of the biggest improvements in performance by using collections. Because, you know, one thing I've been noticing, and not only have I noticed it myself, but I've seen it in other people have noticed it in the tweets that I follow, is that there's so many different ways of doing things, the same thing in .NET now. Is there a performance difference in those things? And how big is it? And that's one thing I've been spending a lot of time and adding a lot more benchmarks to the next version of my book because of that. So let's talk about collections. First, let's talk about creating a collection. This is the most common way people create a collection. Collection equals new list person, right? Everybody does it this way. But is this the most performant way? Really depending on what you're doing. And of course, the answer is no. This is not the most performant way. If you're creating a collection, the better way to do it is to create it like this, okay? New list person, and then give it a count, right? And if you know the count, then that's the best, right? If you know the count of what's going to go in it, that's perfect, right? But I did a test. It just completed not too long ago today. But I had a question of myself yesterday, and I go, okay, well, let's say I have a guesstimate if how many things will be in the collection. Can I use that? And the answer is yes. Okay, it was too late for me to put it into the presentation, but even if you have a guesstimate on how many items will go into the collection, using a count will always speed it up. So please always use a count, even if you're just guessing at it. Okay, and you're going to see the huge performance gain right here. So you can see here the top section is if you're using a with capacity, which is the count, and the lower stuff is not using a count. And you can see there's a big difference, and these differences were bigger in .NET Core and .NET Framework, and we're only looking at .NET 6 and .NET 5 now. And you can see in it looks like .NET 6 is kind of still working on, maybe working on this stuff, but always use capacity, even if you have to guess, okay? Because the test I ran today was, okay, well, how about if I knew half the capacity? Is that better? Yes, it is better. And you'll see that on my website pretty soon too. Okay, so please always use capacity. Creating an array. So there's two major types of creating array in .NET. The first way is usually the way I do it, probably 99% of the time. But there's another way you can do it by using array create instance and give it the type and give it the count that you want. Okay, these are the two ways you do arrays in .NET. So which one is better? The normal way. So I would stay, yeah, as you can see, there's a pretty big difference. I would stay away from create instance unless you absolutely have to use it. Okay, just create arrays normally. That you can see it's a lot more performant if you do it that way. Okay. Now the next thing, I'm going to ask you a question. So I hope you all have your keyboard ready. I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, there are four main ways to loop through a collection. They are for each, do, while, and for. Okay, those are the four major ways of going through a collection. Because I'm not counting parallel stuff. So out of for each, do, while, and for, which do you guys think is the most performant way of looping through a collection? Type in your answers now while I take a drink. So I'm seeing for each, for each. No one's picked, oh, someone picked do while. That's good. For. I'll let it go just a little bit longer. The same. Anybody else want to guess which is fastest out of these four ways? Nope, that's it. Well, here's the answer. Anything but for each. You can see the fastest is for, followed by do while, and then followed by while. Okay, and do while and while are really too close to count to for really. But if you look at the pure numbers, that's the way it works out. So stop using for each. Okay, I've changed all of my open source. I don't use for each anywhere anymore unless I absolutely have to for some reason. Okay, stop using it because there's a big performance gain by not doing it. I know for each is easier, believe me. If for each, I wish for each was the fastest way of doing things because that's the way I like to do it. But stop it. Only use for. Okay. Or do while or while. Yeah. So for is the best. It's the fastest out of those four. Stop the for each madness. Checking for items in the collection. So how do you guys, there's lots of different ways of checking if there's items in a collection of .NET. What do you guys use the most before you operate on a collection to check the number? I'll wait a little bit for your answers. Any? Well, you guys are any happy back at East, I guess. Contains, okay, any? Count, first, yeah. Count, any more? Anyone gonna pick last? No kidding. I guess last would work, but actually last is less performant than first. And what? Anybody else? Nope. Okay. So in this code base for Black Friday, every single place they were using any. Okay, either any, by itself or any with a predicate. Okay, every place in their code they were using any. And this is one of the first things I looked at when I was looking at the code, besides the dispose issues and stuff like that. Okay. The way you should check for items in collection is count. Okay. Count is more performant. I'm going to explain it a little bit on the results slide, but you should be using count. That is the standard. That is what Microsoft enforces using analyze or the editor config. Okay. Instead, you should use count like this. Count is greater than 0. Okay. So let's look at the results. And again, these results are kind of hard to look at. I had to look at this thing like 5 times because I didn't believe it. But right now, any is coming on top. But I don't believe that's going to. I don't think that's going to be the way in the end. But this is .NET 6 and .NET 5. I can tell you for a fact that .NET Framework and .NET Core, any is slower. Okay, you can read it in my book. It's quite a bit slower. Okay, so it looks like they've been working on the performance on this in .NET 5 and .NET 6. So we'll see how it pans out at the very end. But I would stick with count at this point unless Microsoft changes the guidelines. Okay, and do your own benchmarking, of course. Now here's a big one. How do you check for items in an array? Okay. Do not use count. There is a count off of array. Stop using it. Okay. You should only use length. Only. Okay. Why? There's a 4 times increase. I'm not even going to show you the chart. There's a 4 times increase by using length over count. So if you have arrays and you're using count, cut it out right now, and you'll get a 4 times increase in .NET 5 and .NET 6 at least. Okay, and I know it's faster in the other frameworks too. Okay, so stop using count. Microsoft should remove that from arrays if you ask me. But they do. Their code analytics will tell you to use length if you use analyze or editor config. Okay. So, while I was working on, these code performance things, especially for the Black Friday company I was working at, I added a bunch of methods to help this stuff out in my open source projects. I have 3 open source projects. One is .NET Framework, which I don't work on anymore. The second is .NET Core, which I've been around. It's been around for a long time. It's got over 10,000 downloads in NuGet, I think, the last time I checked. And now, since I've kind of left .NET Core and .NET Framework behind, I have a new package actually called Spargene. It's .NET-tips.spargene if you go to the NuGet package manager. It only works with .NET 5 and .NET 6. And I'm focusing on the extensions NuGet package here because what I'm about to show you. So if you haven't checked out any of my NuGet packages, I hope you will. And if you like them, I hope you will contribute to the code. The .NET Core and the .NET 5 code bases are all open for changes right now. So I hope you'll help me out with these. I'm constantly working. I'm actually working on a new release for September 1st, which I've been working really hard on performance this last quarter. And so I'm really excited to share some of those numbers when it comes out on the 1st. So Spargene. So to make things a little easier with collections is I created a extension method in Spargene and the .NET Tips utility called hasItems. I know it's not the best name in the world, but that's what I came up with in the beginning. And what hasItems does is first it checks for null because it's one of the most common things I see people doing with collections. They don't check for null. And then second, it just uses count. Okay. And wait till you see the results of this. I'm not really sure why hasItems is faster, but as you can see in my benchmarking, hasItems is quite a bit faster, like half it. I mean, count is like twice as slow as hasItems. I still don't know why. I really should look at the IL and see what it's spitting out, but if you use hasItems, it's actually faster than count. Okay, so if you look at any of my code, that's what I never use count. I use hasItems because it does 2 checkings in one, not just the count. Because if you have a collection that's null and you try to do a count on it, it's going to blow up on you, right? So to prevent that, to kind of make a guard clause with that, I created hasItems. So that reason alone, you should use my open source project, but that's up to you, of course. So a lot of things I see in code is people creating collections from another collection. There's, again, a ton of ways of doing that. But in a lot of the code I see, they're using a loop. Okay. This is the most common thing I see when I'm analyzing code. And I analyze a lot of code since I'm a contractor, unfortunately. And so this is the most common way I see people doing it. They create a new collection, they go through the old collection, and they add an item into collection until it's less than a count. Okay, that's what I see everywhere. 95% of the time, this is what I see. Don't do this if you can help it. Instead, use the constructor or add range. These, as you'll see, these are much more performant. So if you have a collection, you're just creating a new one from the same items, and you don't need to do like ifs or something like that on it. Always use the constructor or add range if you can. Okay. I know this is not possible all the time, but try to strive for this. Okay. As you'll see, coming up in the next slide is a big difference in creating a list. Yeah. So as you can see, if you create it with the constructor, is actually the fastest way, followed by add range, which is slightly less performant, too close to call really. But as you can see, if you use a for, you're really screwing yourselves, especially if you get up into the 100, 500 or more items in the collection. So if you, like I said, if you can, this is something new I've just added to the presentation. If you can, make sure you use add range or the constructor. Okay. Oh, and the other thing is, if you use for without capacity, there's 2 times the memory allocation. So I don't really talk about memory in this talk because if I see the memory basically the same throughout all the different methods, I don't even show it to you. But this one I stood out because it was 2 times the memory allocation if you used for without capacity. So you always, and remember at the beginning of the talk, I said, memory performance affects memory and memory affects in performance. This is one of those times where they kind of really go together because it is a memory allocation problem. So get your keyboards ready. A couple months before I left my last contract, one of the junior developers called me and said, Dave, I've got this problem and the East Coast team won't leave me alone. And I said, what are they trying to make you do? And he said, they got a new lead developer that wants me to go through and change all of my link statements throughout the code. Because that developer said doing it one way versus the other way is more performant. So what should I do, Dave? And I go, let me do a benchmark test. And I did. So before I tell you the results of that, of course, I want to ask you, so put it in the chat. There's 2 ways to do link statements in .NET, right? Link is awesome. I've loved it ever since it came out in .NET 2, I think, or .NET 3. So there's 2 ways of doing it. You either can use the API, which is the original way of doing link, or you can use the new link lambdas down below. So all of you on the call still, which one do you think is faster, the API or lambdas, basically? API or link, yeah, API or link / lambda. Yeah. One API, no, more APIs, there we go, link, no difference. Yep. Lambda, 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 link. Yep. You guys are kind of both ways, it looks like. Mostly, looks like most of you selected link. So, drum roll, which is faster? Well, again, this is a place where I'm waiting to see how things hash out in .NET 5 and .NET 6, but lambdas are faster. Okay. So I don't really use the old style anymore unless I absolutely can't figure out how to do the query in lambdas. Otherwise, I always stick with lambdas, luckily. And you can see in this chart, I know it's kind of hard, lambdas are faster in .NET 5 and .NET 6. But I do want to say this performance change is much different in .NET Core and .NET Framework. Okay, So if you're still on Framework and .NET Core, use Lambdas, stop using the API if you can help it, okay? And it looks like the performance is pretty close with .NET 5 and .NET 6. We'll see how it pans out in the end when .NET 6 is released in November. But anyway, use Lambdas. So the lead developer at that company was wrong. I think there was a question about Dispose stuff. Do you do it in the finalizer? You need to check to make sure that Dispose was called before the finalizer. So if you want to send me an email, we can get more into that later. Yeah. So any more questions? It's not linear. Yeah, that's a overall Lambdas are faster. Like I said, I'm going to wait and see what comes out when .NET 6 is released for the class finalizer. Yeah. Okay. So how do you find all these issues in your code besides hiring me? I'm going to go through the methods that I use besides my own noggin, but I'll tell you at the end. So if you want to go check your code to see where you need to, fix the performance stuff, you need to use tools. Otherwise, it's going to be a very slow, boring process. Okay, and that's what I use. I use tools, and I'm going to show you my favorite tools that I use to find these issues. The cost of these tools is literally nothing compared to the time you're going to waste if you do it all manually. Okay, so please get these tools for your developers. Every developer needs the first two tools I'm going to show you. The last tool, I'll talk about that at the very end because it's more expensive. Okay, so if you're not using tools to find these, you need to do it. Okay, and the first tool that's pretty much free is Visual Studio Analyze / the editor config in Visual Studio 2019. Okay, and everything in Visual Studio is moving to editor config. Not that I like it that much, but that's where it's going. Some of the things that if you don't use Analyze, some of the things Analyze checks for in your code is design, globalization, naming, performance is what we're talking about, security, usage, maintainability, portability, and reliability. Okay. None of my code is released with usually all these numbers at 0, if I can help it. Because I want to make sure the code I check in is the best code it can possibly be, especially since I'm a contractor. And I don't want to leave the contract and people say, oh, that Dave McCarter wrote crappy code and blah, blah. Yeah, so I make sure that the code is not crappy before I check it in. I wish more people had that mindset, but unfortunately they don't. So the first one I want to talk about is Analyze using the CLR. So for a long time, we've had Analyze in Visual Studio, not in the enterprise, not in the professional version, but it's in the other versions, I think. And this is what I used to tell people in my talk. The first thing you should do tomorrow, if you have a .NET Framework projects, is this: go to every single project and enable code analysis and check the rule sets you want to use. Okay. There's really only 2 rule sets I use. I use this one or everything for executables. So if it's DLL, I use Microsoft Managed Recommended Rules. If it's a website or an EXE or something like that, I always check everything because everything includes more security and things like that. So if you're using the CLR, please do this tomorrow, okay? And I'm going to tell you right now, when you build, it's going to be painful because you're going to see a lot more violent code, a lot of more things in the error window when you do this. And even this Black Friday company, that's the first thing I did to the solution was I went to every single project and turned these on. And the next day after I checked it in, some developer went through all the single projects and turned it off. And he goes, Dave, the build is too painful now. And I go, good, it should be painful. until you fix these problems, okay? So I know I'm being real hard on this, but this results in better code and less people bugging me that stuff isn't working. So if you're using the CLR, please do this to all your projects tomorrow. That should be the first thing you do when you go into work tomorrow. If you're using .NET Core, .NET 5, or .NET 6, everything is moving to what is called .editor config files now. Like I said, I like the older way better, but you know, Microsoft does the things the way they want to do things. But basically, editor config is this new format they came up with for Visual Studio that basically lists all those rules in these lines here where you can set up warnings or all kinds of different. I'm not going to go into what makes up an editor config. I forgot to post it. I'll do it at the end. But I have the most comprehensive editor config ever made to mankind. And I have it up on GitHub. You can go check it out if you want to use my editor config, because it's a lot more stringent and follows my rules. I'll post a link to that later. So this is what it looks like. And this is usually where I put it. Oh, there's my editor config. You can go there. You can go bit.ly editor config 5, and you can get my editor config that works for .NET 5, and it will work for the other versions too. And what I do is I always have only one per solution, and I always stick it in the solution items, and so therefore there's only one place to use it. So if you're getting my editor config or using a new one, make sure it's available to all the solutions, meaning it has to be in the root of source, basically. So all the other projects can use it. It has to be in the root of source. Okay, so go check out editor config. Like I said, I don't have time to really get into it today because there's a lot of stuff to editor config. Luckily, Visual Studio just added in one of the latest updates to Visual Studio 2019 a GUI to do this. Up until a couple months ago, we never had a GUI. We never had a comprehensive list, except for my list, of all the things you can set with editor config. So you can check that out in Visual Studio. Now, actually, now if you double click on editor config, it will actually bring up that GUI if you have the latest version of .NET Visual Studio 2019. Okay. So what Analyze and Editor Config does is every time you build, it's going to show you this in the errors window. It's going to show you these things as errors, warnings, and messages. Okay. Of course, all the errors have to be fixed before the build will complete. And then before I release like my open source project, I make sure there's no warnings or messages going on either. Because warnings are important, messages less so, but it's still things you should be worried about. And there's lots of different categories. You can see here, I'm really only looking at the performance category. And it'll tell you what it's wrong. If you double click on it, it will take you to the code. And if you don't know how to fix it properly, you can click on that CA 1820. It will take you to a help file. And it'll tell you how to fix it, hopefully, even though Microsoft documentation gets worse and worse. Anyway, please make sure you do this. Please don't check in any code that has errors, of course, but has high warnings either. Your fellow developers will really thank you for that. Okay, so that's it for Analyze. Please make sure you're using it. Most of you have access to Analyze, so please use it. Another tool I've used for a really long time is a tool from Submain called Code It Right. And I'll explain why I like it here in a second. So it does static code analysis over your code, meaning the code doesn't even need to build. And it will analyze your code the exact same way that Analyze does. It uses the same rules that Analyze does in Visual Studio. It just finds all the same issues that Analyze does and more, and it's highly configurable. Code It Right is. But the best thing I like about Code It Right, I think I have a screen grab, is that not only will it show you the issue, 90% of the time you click a button, it will fix the issue for you, right? This is something Visual Studio has never had and still doesn't have and is not even on the roadmap. I love Code It Right because it will fix 90% of the problems without me really doing anything except for clicking a button. I know the owner of the company, Serge. He's a great guy. He did a lot of work. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work right in .NET 5 or .NET 6 or .NET Core. So Code It Right really only works properly in .NET Framework. So if you're still on .NET Framework, I don't know how, if you guys have, how many of you are still using the .NET Framework? I'll let you type that in while I'm talking. So if you're using .NET Framework, I highly recommend Code It Right. I cannot highly recommend it enough. It will pay for itself the first time you use it, and all developers need this. Okay. Oh, and this is what it looks like. This is the window here. It will show you all the issues. It also has reports like metrics and statistics and all kinds of other really cool things. It's so much more comprehensive than what you see from Visual Studio offerings. But if you look to the right, far right of my screen, you can see a correct button, right? All I have to do is press that button and it will correct all the issues for me, right? That's all I have to do. It is so freaking easy. And you can actually correct everything at one time if you want. I would not do that. I do things one at a time, and then I go back and look at the code, make sure it's correct. But you can do that. So if you're using the framework, .NET Framework, I definitely recommend getting a copy of Code It Right. It's not super expensive at all. And like I said, it'll pay for itself the first time you use it. It does not work properly on, it does not work as well on .NET Core as it does on the framework. And I've been after them, but I've given up. The last thing I want to talk about, and this is something I've yet to see any team do that I've worked with, at least, unless I'm there, and that's memory profiling. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because I want to get across how important memory profiling is, okay? You need to run a memory profiler to find any memory, the last bit of memory performance issues in running code. All these other things don't check running code. This is the only thing that checks running code. And you need to have it running in near to production servers or machines so you can get a better analysis off of it. And if you use a memory profiler, and this is why most people, I don't think, use it besides the cost. And the one I'm going to show you is the cost is trivial. It's very time consuming to go through these reports, you know, analyze and code it right. It's super easy to go through. It's super easy to understand what the violations are. That is not the case in memory profiling. It's a long, boring process, but it's super, super important because this is the only way you'll find the last bit of memory and performance issues. And since those two things go along together, it's imperative you do this before you release stuff to the public, okay? I can't stress this enough, but I don't see anybody doing it. Not one team has done it. I even worked on a team once where I said, yeah, I'm going to do some memory profiling on the code before we release it. And the manager said, no, we're not going to pay you for that. I'm going, okay, whatever. But I can't stress how important this is. Because no matter how much code analytics you do, no matter how much stuff you have in your head, you're not going to find everything unless you do this. And the tool that I use is .NET Memory Profiler from SciTech Software. You probably have never heard of it. That's okay. I've tried all the major tools out there, and I like them all, but I like Memory Profiler from SciTech Software better. And if you want to email me, I'll tell you why. But this is what it looks like when you're running a code analysis on it. I mean, when you're running a memory profile against it. Don't ever do this on production, because running a memory profiler is very intrusive to your executable, and it does slow it down, guaranteed, hands down. So never run this on production. Only run it on near production machines, okay? And what I look at while it's running, so I don't see any major things happening, is in here it's showing you the megabytes per second, all those kind of cool things. And what I'm looking at, I know it's hard for you to see. Not only am I'm looking at the snapshots that I usually set up like every 5 minutes or so, but I'm also looking at total instances, live instances, total bytes, live bytes, allocations a second, and allocation of bytes a second. Those are my favorite things to look at while I'm actually doing the memory profiling. I don't have to sit there and look at it because it'll create a report you can go back and look at later. I just like looking at it because I think it's cool, and I want to stop it if I see something major going on. So this is what it looks like, and the cool thing. Well, the next screen shows you after the profiling's over. So after you're done the profiling, it has to gather all that information up into a report, and this is the report. And the biggest part of this report is the top, and where it's yellow. And that's where I start finding, well, at least in this screen grab, I'm finding disposable issues in this screen grab. I'm also finding direct event handler routes, which can be a problem. The one you can barely see is undisposed instances. So I look at that, of course. So I always target the disposable stuff first, but then I start looking at allocations of arrays and things like that. And the one really cool thing I like about Dotnet Memory Profiler is that when it does snapshots, it will actually snapshot the values that are in the object, okay? One of the important things, especially when you're going through this report, is if you see something going wrong with an object or a collection or something like that, you kind of want to see what the values were when that problem happened. That's actually held inside the type. I'm making hand gestures nobody can see. And you can actually see the values. It does take more processing to do this, but it's totally worth it because then I can see what actual email value or something was in this object when the problem happened, right? For me, even though it does slow down the memory profiling, it's invaluable information when I'm trying to track down issues. And from there, you can actually drill down all the way down into the originating type that caused the problem, okay? And that's what I'm showing here. Once when I started using Memory Profiler, I remember I was finding stuff wrong in the HTTP object in .NET Framework, and I had to go talk to the team when I was at the Microsoft Summit. I go, do you know how you have a problem going on in your HTTP object? You need to look at it. I sent them my results and everything, and I don't know if they ever worked on it because I didn't go back and look. But there's a ton of information here that helps you make it, with graphs and charts and things like that. It makes it really easy to track down exactly where the problem was, what exactly the object was, and what exactly the values were within that object. Okay, so it's super important information, especially if you're going through it. Yeah, I'm just showing you there. I'm doing dispose issues. I think, is that the last slide for this section? No, I'm going the wrong way, I think. The one thing I will tell you, and you can, if any managers are on the call, or you can tell your manager, not every developer needs a memory profiler, right? The only developer or developers that have access to the memory profiler should be people who really understand the results. And that's not everybody on your team. And like I said, this is a long, slow process depending on the size of your program. And you don't want all of your team members bogged down with this. You probably only want one or two, maybe one real person looking at this before you go to production, okay? So I will, if you complain about $250 for a license, then you only really need one for your team, okay? Not everybody needs it. The other tools I talk about in this talk or other talks, everybody needs, but this is the only one. You really only need one or two people to have it, okay? So I hope I made my point that you need to work on .NET Memory Profiler. Will it work on .NET Core? Yes, it works on all the different frameworks of .NET. And even some companies I've worked at, I know this is cheesy, hacky way of doing it, but like when I couldn't really run the code in the proper way that I told you how you do this, I actually run this against unit tests. So running against the code at all will show you stuff. And I've even run it when I've had no other choice. I've run it against unit tests, right? But you can run it against processes on different servers. You can run it on processes on your machine. And it works really, really good for ASP.NET too, if you guys are wondering. It gathers a lot more information for ASP.NET projects. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking about memory profiling, but because it's super, super important, I really kind of make a point about it. But I'm going to tell you, none of these tools find everything. Not a single one I've showed you. So the tools you need are these tools and your brain. And because I guarantee you, once you fix these things over and over again, it's going to be embedded in your brain like it is in mine. Okay. So there's no tool that's 100%. I'm sorry about that. Any questions? Is it necessary to use function? You don't need yes. Somebody uses is necessary to use the new throwaway way of doing results, and yes, you should be using that. Even if you don't look at the value, you should be using the throwaway value. Yes. When should you do the dispose? That should be in the class, not the finalizer. Okay. If you want to email me, I have a longer spiel about that. I know I'm kind of over time already, so email me and I'll tell you. But it should be in the dispose method of your class, not the finalizer. All right, encore. Judas Priest. I was 5th row of this concert. Aha. Okay. So one of the things I've been working on the last couple of weeks is I said, I think at the beginning of this session that, you know, it seems like with every version of .NET, we're getting new ways of doing the exact same thing. You know, we kind of talked about that a little bit with the link statements, the count statements. There's tons of ways of doing counts and stuff. So one thing I've really been working on the last couple of weeks for the next version of my book, and also some articles I'm going to be putting up on my website, are any of these ways different? I've kind of showed you a couple of the ways that are different enough to talk about. But here are 3 things I found today really quick. This list will grow, but I only had time to do 3 of these things today before the session today. So in these 3 things I'm going to show you, it doesn't matter which way you do it. There's really no performance. There's no big performance issue. Creating a new type. There's like 3 ways of doing new to instantiate a new type in .NET. All 3 are pretty much the same, so don't worry about that. No coalescing assignments. Again, there's a couple ways of doing it. There's no performance difference really, so don't worry about it. The one thing I was kind of curious about one time, and you'll see this in the next version of my book because I'm doing a lot of work on different ways of doing things, and that makes a difference. I wanted to know if sending in information through a parameter that is an array is different if you use, instead of using just the params keyword for the parameter, and there's no difference really. So I kind of expected that, but I'm going to list all these things in my book and my site, things you really don't need to worry about, because I'm doing all that hard work for you to figure it out. So. And also, don't trust anything I just said. Make sure you do your own benchmarking with benchmarking.net. Benchmarking.net is a NuGet package that I've been using for years. It's the same exact NuGet package that the Microsoft team uses to benchmark the code for .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET Core, all that kind of stuff. Okay. These guys are really smart who wrote this, and I follow them on Twitter. And I even have a NuGet package out there that's newer that makes using benchmark.net easier. So I hope you'll check that out. It's for the Spargene project only. So anyway, don't trust anything I just said. Make sure you benchmark your own code. Super, super important. All right, here's some resources. I'll leave them up on the screen for a couple seconds while I take a drink. Please check out my book, of course, and a lot of the information I'm putting online now, so you can check it out there. I'm still working on that. Please check out my NuGets packages and my open source projects. You can go to GitHub, a real .NET Dave, or NuGet profiles David McCarter. You can see all that stuff. Please contribute to my open source if you would like. I really appreciate it. There's a really big performance thing that I talk about in 256 seconds with .NET Dave that you'll be surprised with. So go check that out. I don't have time to talk about it today. And the next resources, improve your model classes with object-oriented programming, serialization. It's on my website. And those are the tools that I use religiously in my code. CodeRush from DevExpress. If you watch my show on Saturday, you can get a free copy of CodeRush from DevExpress. Code it right if I'm using the CLR. GoStock, I use it everywhere because that helps me write documentation that no one likes to write. And there's the link for the Dynamic Profiler. There's lots of other profilers. If you have Redgate, you already have a profiler, so you could use that one. But this is the one I like the best, and it's only like 250 bucks. Super cheap if you think about what this thing really does. Okay. Okay. With that, we are done. So thanks for attending. There's all my links and emails and all that kind of stuff. You can please feel free to email me if you have questions about performance or anything else, really. And also, before I forget, I want to plug my show again. It's every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you go to my website, I have really great guests this whole month. And like I said, if you watch the show, you can also win a copy of CodeRush too.